Broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone and welcome to Community Force Training. We do have a few attendees still logging in, so we will give them a couple of minutes to log in and then we'll go ahead and get started with our session. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So of course today we're going to be talking about the scholarships site, and we'll be going over the application rollover, how to roll over your application form. And of course, as you all attended the sessions before, I'm Christine Smith. I'm the trainer here with Community Force. And we also should have joining us shortly Daniel Ayala. He's the sales manager. He will be assisting in the background once he's able to join. And then also, as we go through the webinar today, we do have a break midway through. I'll break in between certain sections, and we'll do a question and answer section at that time. So if you do have any questions, go ahead and feel free. When you have those questions, don't wait till that question period. Just go ahead and enter the questions into this dialog box here. If you don't see the dialog box, you should see an item somewhere on your screen, maybe in the right-hand corner, that has a little arrow. If you open the orange arrow, if you click on that orange arrow, that will open up a dialog similar to what you see here. Locate the section that says questions, and it'll have either a plus sign or this negative sign if it's open, or if you have a newer version, it might be a darker line with maybe a drop-down arrow. And you can click on that item. That'll open up the question box. Go ahead and type the question in there. Once you type the question, go ahead and click send. That will send it to me, and then when we get to the question and answer section, I'll open up those questions and review those and discuss those at that time. You'll also notice a little hand raise symbol here. So if you are having some difficulties, if Daniel does join, of course, then he will be able to assist you to try to help you get connected. Otherwise, as I'm going through the session, of course, I'm not able to stop and help individuals get connected. So if you do raise that hand, then hopefully somebody will be here to assist you. Now, the users today that are going to be benefiting from the training session are going to be any of the back-end administrators, so any of you global admins or department administrators, anyone responsible for setting up your application form, getting it ready for the next period, maintaining your application forms. Those are the ones that are going to be benefiting from this session. And then, of course, today's session, again, we're going over application rollover. So what application rollover is, that's when you're ready to start your new cycle. So you have your application form from the last cycle. You're going to now clone it and create a new cycle period. So we're going to talk about cloning existing applications. And then once you clone them, of course, that's the stage before you go live with that next cycle. That's the stage you're going to want to update your application form. So any lessons learned from the last process, then of course that will be when you will be updating the application. And let's see here. Okay. And then we'll also be talking about updating the funding sources. So when you clone your application, you're going to need to update the funding sources. So that's the pool of money that's funding that application. So we're going to talk about how to do that with a one-to-one process. So that's one application with one pool of money funding that application, as well as a one-to-many process. One application with multiple application forms funding it. And then also when you clone your applications, the notification templates, all those email templates that were in the existing application will clone over. So we'll talk about reviewing those, as well as the evaluation tasks and the committee setup. That also clones over. And then, of course, once you're done with an existing application, you can archive that. So we'll talk about how to archive obsolete application forms that you're done with the process. You no longer want to see them in the listing. How do you clone those over? So let's go ahead and get started and go to the site. So let me go ahead and open up our site here. And so the first step in cloning your application is to go to the Setup Application Form. So I'm here on the Home dashboard, and I'm going to Set Up Application Forms and clicking the icon. And once I open up that icon, you'll see that we have all the applications listed. So of course I would locate the application form I want to clone. So I'm going to start with this one-to-one application. We'll do that process first. So I'm going to clone the application. So to clone the application, of course, you have a button here on this page called Clone Existing Application. So you click that button, and when you click that button, it will take you to the same page that is the general information setup. So any of you that are familiar with the setup of an application, and when you go into the actual application, there's that general information icon. This is the same screen as that general information icon. This is all the settings that control the functionality of the actual application. So of course, since we're cloning an existing application, the first step in the process is to select the template for an application. So what's the application we want to clone? So I'm going to hit the drop down arrow here. I'm going to locate the application I wish to clone. Hopefully I picked the right one here. And then once I select that, you'll notice it then takes that application and all of the information that was on the general information for that application will now be populated into this new application form that we're building. So it's just making an exact replica of that application form. So then, of course, your next step then is this is the new application. This is the one we're cloning. This is the new application. So let's give it a name. So I'm going to go ahead and name this 2018 Form for Organization with One Fund. I'm just going to change it so I can keep them separate. And then, of course, here is a description. Of course, no one sees the description other than the internal staff. This is admin staff. This is for internal purposes only, but this is a description, so you may want to populate that with the data. And then, of course, everything else stays the same. If you do on this new application, if there's some things that you need to adjust, this is the stage that you would adjust those. So, of course, if we won't go through all the details of what every one of these icons are, or these fields are. We did cover that in another training, the one on application build. In Module 3, under General Information of Module 3, if you go to the Scholarship Knowledge Base, you'll see that there's information that talks about the breakdown of every one of these fields and building the application. But of course, since it did clone that original application, you'll notice the start date and deadline date, of course, need to be adjusted, because that is picking up the old date information. And when you clone an application, that's one of the key things you're looking at, that you're going to go in and make adjustments. That's one of the major things, is looking at dates. Any place where you had dates in the old application, now in the new application, you're going to need to manually adjust those dates. So of course, the begin date and start date, I'm going to go ahead and make this, I'm going to go ahead and make this 01/2018. And then the deadline, we will make it 5/31/2018. Okay, so now I've adjusted that deadline date. And if the deadline time is the same, then you can just bypass that field. You don't need to populate it again. If you want to adjust the URL, you can do so at this time. Reply sent from, if this is a different staff member or you want to change this email address, you're using this in your email templates, then of course this is where you would change that. If you are using monetary, if you have a fee associated to your application form, then of course this is a new application form, it's a new year. If your fee has changed, that's something you're going to want to look at. And then of course adjust the fee for this specific, this is for the new application form. And then all the other settings, you look at those. If they haven't changed, then of course if it's the same process, then you wouldn't need to make any adjustments on those. And then another thing you're going to want to look at is in the instructions of that application, just make sure in the instruction field, this is that dashboard instruction that the applicants see. Did you manually type any dates in that instruction form? This is the new application, so now this is where you would want to adjust the dates in any instructions that you have as well. And then of course, Once you've made your appropriate changes for the new application, you just need to go ahead and hit save, because I want to show you one thing you want to make note of. And this is especially important when you have a one-to-many application. When I hit save, it's been saved, you'll notice you do have an academic year. So anytime you create an application, keep track of that academic year that comes up. That's important when linking your funds, because all the funding sources need to have that same academic year, because that's how the system maintains the history, the award history from year to year, is through this academic year. It looks at the funding source, looks at the academic year in that funding source, then looks at the applications that were for that same period and links them to that specific application form. So here we have this academic year, and that only appears, and it's based off of these two dates here, the start date and end date. Academic year, there's an academic year chart in your administration dashboard. It's an annual budget academic chart. That's where it's picking up saying these dates here fall within this fiscal year, academic year. And then of course I can now hit save and exit. And of course, it's going to tell me the name already exists because I've already hit save. So I'm going to go ahead and just hit exit now. And then once I've created that application, it will be here on the listing. You'll see here's that new application. Of course, there's no funding source tied to it yet. But before we get to the funding source, we want to now go in, click on this application now. Now that we've got something built, we can now click on that application name, and that will take us to the Build dashboard. And then, of course, here is, again, this is where we're going to make any adjustments to that new application form. We now have our new application. Now, from lessons learned, let's go in and make our adjustments. Also, let's go into all the areas that we had activated. If we had pre-qualification questions, let's click on those. In the pre-qualification questions, did we type any dates? So you'll notice in the specific question that I have, are you a member of your high school's 2014 graduating class? This is now a 2018 application form. So then, of course, since I had a date in that question, I will want to edit it so it fits this specific application's form. So I might want to put, are you a member of your high school's 2018 graduating class? And then, of course, hit save and exit. It's going to tell me that question's been updated. I want to make sure it's updated here. And then I go over here, make sure that's updated, make sure the combination's still the correct combination. Look at your denial message. Did you have a date in that denial message? Do you need to update that as well? And then, of course, hit save and exit to save the changes. And then the general information, which is where we just were, you always, after you've created and cloned this fund, the next step you want to do is go into general information, because what isn't present when you clone an application is if you scroll all the way to the bottom, and this is an important feature and an important step to do, is you'll notice you now have the ability, after you've cloned it, and you go into the general information after you've cloned it, you now need to add that contact. It's not there when you're cloning. You have to go in after you've cloned it, create that application, click on the application name, go into the setup dashboard, go into general information, and add the contact. And this is very important to add the contact, because this is the application contact, your internal staff member that's responsible for maintaining this application form. And if you have settings set on your site that you want emails to go to the application contact, if you do not set the application contact, then those emails will not go to anyone and you will not receive those. If you have emails templates that you're using, and in the email templates you've used the merge field, contact first name, contact last name, contact email, contact phone, those specific merge fields are looking at the staff members' contact information that's linked here. So I'm going to go ahead and click add a contact. I'm going to search for an individual, hopefully I'm in here, to add as that contact. I find my name, and then of course I can add myself as that contact so that I will get those emails that come to me, as well as applicants can receive my information if I use those in the email templates and I send those to the applicants. So then of course I'm going to go ahead now and hit save and exit. And now I've got that contact added for that. That's the one step that you want to make sure and do. The next step, of course, I can look at my submit message. Just kind of look at your messages. Did I put a date in my submit message? This one, of course, didn't have a submit message, so maybe I want to add one. The submit message is that online message. That appears to the applicant when they hit that submit button. Once they hit that submit button, they get this online message. So of course, if you had a date in that, if you typed any date information, you're going to want to make that adjustment, that manual adjustment. Then of course, hit save and exit. And then go on to the next textual information where you could have manually typed data. Manage text tabs. If anyone's using text tabs in this specific application form, I don't have any activated, but what text tabs are, if I click on one, you'll notice text tabs, what they do is they will create a button on the application's dashboard. So when the applicant's in that application form and they're completing the dashboard, in the lower right-hand corner, any text tabs that you publish, there'll be a little button in the right-hand corner of the dashboard with the name of what you type here. That'll be the name of the button. And then whatever information you type here, when they click that button, then that's the information that will be available to the applicants when they click that button. So one thing, if you do have text tabs and you have been using text tabs, or even if you haven't been using and you want to activate them, anytime you clone an application and there's text tabs you will have to go into, and if you've used them in the past, when you come here, you'll see the names, but you still need to republish those because when you clone, it does not publish those text tabs and they won't be available until you go back in and actually publish them with the new application. So that means you would have to click on the tab you want to publish, locate it, make sure to select this published, and then hit save and exit, and that's another step you'll need to do with that specific process. And then that will be published and the applicants will have that button. So if you're using those, you've cloned an application that has them, always make sure you go in after you've cloned, go into the setup application, go into manage text tabs, click on the tab, and be sure to publish that specific tab. And so here, I'll just do one here real quick here. And then I hit save and exit. And now you'll see there's the button, FAQ, and I also made sure I published it. It's got the check mark, it's been published, and now it's ready to go. So that's another step you'll have to do with cloning. If you do have text tabs, be sure to go in and republish them because they do not publish the initial clone. Okay, and then the next step, of course, is sections and questions. So if I go into sections and questions, when you're here in sections and questions, of course, this is all the sections that were on the application that you cloned. So of course, here when you clone, you'll notice deadline dates. This is something you're going to want to watch. When you first initially clone an application form, whatever the deadline is that you've chosen in the general information for the application, it's going to give that deadline to all of those specific sections. Now, some of your sections may have a deadline different from the application form. So step one is you're going to look at the sections and questions. Do you have any sections that are after the fact and that need to be added with a different deadline date? So of course this one, I don't have any, but if you have post-acceptance sections, those have different deadline dates. So of course, to adjust the deadline, I'll go ahead and show you. You go here to the edit, click on the edit icon, and then of course, make sure that your section deadline has been selected, and then that'll open it up so that you can enter a deadline for that specific section. Now this is a staff section. So I really don't want staff to have a deadline, so I can go ahead and just put no on that because I don't want a deadline on that specific section. And then of course, then I can hit save and exit. Look at your instructions on your sections. Do you have any date information in those instructions? And another place that individuals have a tendency to sometimes put dates is in the section name. Now, this is where you want to use extreme caution. The section name is what you see internally. The section display name, that is what the applicant sees. So if you have a date in the section display name, then before you go live, of course, this is the display name is where you want to change it. You want to take that date out completely or add a new year date if you wish. However, do not, even if you have a date and that date's not correct, do not change the section XML name unless you definitely do not want that to populate in other applications. You don't need to run reports across years on that section because the XML name is how the system maps. That's a meta language that the system uses, and it's a language that helps it look at one application form. So if you're using import from other application forms, it can't import if you change this XML name. So do not change that name. If there's a date in it, then you're going to have to leave that date in the XML name. But remember, the applicant doesn't see XML name. The applicant sees the display name. So XML name, do not change that, especially if you have integration. That's how we integrate with your third-party software is through that XML name. You change it, you've broken the link for your integration. So it's very important not to change these. And of course, when building, it's important, to think of that kind of thing so that you don't get to where you might come to a stage and you see a date and you accidentally change it and now you've broke the link to your other application forms and your integration. If you don't put a date in it, then you won't have to, have that situation come about. Okay, so then of course, once you make changes here, you're going to want to hit save and exit. So of course, you're going to look at all your section names, adjust them, the display name, not the XML, but the display name. Also look at when you clone, you'll notice any section that was in the original application, like these two sections here were not activated in my original application that I cloned from. If I want to make them active now in this application, then I need to put a check mark in them and click save. And then once I click save, then that's now an active app section in this application form. Same with this one. If I want to do the same, I can hit save and then make sure that it's an active section. Or there could be at this stage, maybe there was some sections I don't want to include, but I don't want to lose them completely. All I have to do is come here, maybe remove that section, hit save, and then it's no longer an active section. I can do that with sections for the applicants. They will no longer see those. As long as they're not active, the applicant will not get those. Then, once you're done adjusting your sections, your next step is to go into the actual sections themselves. And then this is where you would make adjustments to your questions. Now I'm going to go ahead and stop here because before I get into too much detail, we've kind of covered quite a bit of information. I do see we have some questions. So let me go ahead and look at the questions and see what we have here. Okay, so we have a question about the academic year. So back in the general information, the academic year is automatic, yes. And how that is built is the system, when you enter the start date and you enter the deadline date, and of course this is only for ones that have deadlines. Of course, if it's a rolling application with no deadline, it's not going to have an academic year because it's assuming there's no deadline. So it's going to look at the start date and the deadline date, and there is a chart on the administration dashboard right here, administration. There's a chart called Manage Academic Years, and this chart tells the system what the start date of a period and an end date of a period is, and what the academic year is for that specific period. So whenever you enter in your application, so I'm going back into that application, to the general information. So whatever dates I put here, it then looks at that chart. As soon as you click save on those dates, it then automatically builds the academic year and puts that in there. Now, those of you who are on our new 9.0 platform that just came out this last week, of course, that is, the academic will be automatic, but it is something that you can adjust, of course. There's an adjustment piece in the new process. So just so you know that. I'm not on the new 9.0 platform yet. This is actually the last training for the 8.1 version. And then starting our next month's training, we'll be starting to train on the 9.0 platforms. Okay, but this is the 8.1 and the academic year is automatic based on these two dates. Do I have any other questions? Okay. So back into sections and questions. So we've talked about sections, updating those, looking for dates, looking at the instructions on your sections. Do you have any dates in the instructions that you need to remove, adjusting those? If you have a deadline that's different from the application, making sure and adjusting that deadline. So then the next thing, of course, is then going into the section in the section name. So of course, here's the section. And you're looking at your question names, same thing. Do you have dates typed in the question names? If you have dates, like I do here, I would need to click on that question name. I'm clicking right on the name. Here, this question box here, this is that editor box. This is what the applicant sees. The other two fields here, so of course here, if I had a date, this is that XML. I do not want to change that XML if there's a date. However, this is a report name. This is internal only. I can change that name, but you do not want to change the XML name. The report name is the column header name. So when this goes into an Excel spreadsheet, there's that column header. This is the name in the column header. This is internal. This is what the applicant sees. This is the XML that you do not want to change. Then, of course, if I have adjustments to questions that, like maybe some values in my drop-downs or my checkboxes, this is the time before you go live. This is when you would make those changes. So maybe there was some majors, or here it says there's a drop-down. So if I go to the values, maybe there's some more schools I want to add. This is when I would do that. I would go into the value. I would open up the add values. So this is a drop-down question. I click on the add values. And then, of course, here's my value listing. And then this is where I could then add my new school. And we have a label, which is what the applicant sees. The value is what the system is actually picking up. That's the system, how it's reading it. So you can have the label be one thing. Maybe you want the applicant to see maybe an abbreviated version, but you want the system to pick up the full name. You can type something different here, like I might want to put N school, like that. Then you must hit the plus sign to save that line. It's not saved until you've hit the plus sign and there's now a red X on it. The red X will delete that line and it'll no longer be present. If I'm looking at one of these names and I realize I had a typo and so I couldn't fix it once it was live, now I'm no longer live, this is my new application, I want to fix that name, all I need to do is go into the editor, click the editor box. You'll notice it has this, each item, it has listed twice. So you see we have select, all drop-downs must start with the word select. If a drop-down does not start with the word select, then the system looks at the first item in the line and considers that question answered with that first value. However, it sees the word select, it knows that question has not been answered yet. So that's the reason why you see that word select. The next one here, you'll see this is the actual label. There's no space between the label and the value. However, you'll see this little symbol. This is the separator. This is how the system knows this is the label, this is the value, this is what's separating the two. This is a tilde, and it is on the shift. There's your one key on your keyboard. To the left of that, on your shift to the left, you'll see that little symbol. And so anytime you type something, so if I was to add something here, I could put new school, then I could put my tilde, and then north school, like that. Then I could then hit save, and then you'll notice it populates it with that specific item. Now, if it's the same information, the label and the value is the same, then all you need to do is just type it once. You don't need to put it in the value. You can hit the plus sign, and then it'll add that. And then hit the plus sign again to save it. Save and close editor. Yeah. Okay, and then hit save. For some reason it's not wanting to save, but you would click that and it would normally save. Of course, like I said, I'm working on an old site. This is a training site, and it's been, so many things have been added and taken away from it that it tends to cause things to not function appropriately. So of course I'm going to go ahead and hit cancel there, but normally you'd hit that plus sign and it would add another line. And then of course here, this is also, maybe you have some questions you had last year. Maybe you want to exclude them this year, but you don't want to completely delete them. So if you had a question you wish to exclude, that's what this exclude here is. If I was to mark this yes, then this question would no longer be present. However, I didn't delete it completely in case next year I want to bring it back. I don't want to take it out. Maybe just 1 year, there's one question I don't want in my application form this year, but in future years I may want to keep it. I can just exclude it. It's not deleted completely, but it's still there for me to bring back the next year. And then of course I would just remove the exclude on the next year's process. Okay. One thing you do want to use caution is if you do exclude questions or you delete questions completely. So if I wanted to delete a question, I would just select it and then hit delete custom question. Now, if no one's applied to this application, if you haven't started testing, it'll allow you to delete. Otherwise, if you've started testing and there's an application already started, it won't allow you to delete a question, and then that's when you would have to exclude as well. And you can exclude from this page too by just selecting and hitting the exclude up here. So if you do delete a question, let me just shrink this down. You do want to use caution in deleting questions. For instance, here, you'll see I have a question with a green condition on it. Anytime you see the green, that means there's a condition. If I was, of course, if I want to see the condition, so this is where you need to be familiar with your application before you start deleting questions. This specific question has another question it's dependent on in order for it to appear. So if I click this add edit, I can see what that question is. General information, do you have a cell phone? Is exactly no, then this question's to be hidden. So the question, do you have a cell phone? So this question here, if for some reason I decided to remove this question or exclude this question, if I deleted this specific question, then this question, which was dependent on that question, this question would then show because the dependent question is no longer available. So when you're deleting questions and excluding questions, that's something you're going to want to pay attention to. Make sure that the question you're deleting doesn't have another question that's dependent on that question. Same with sections. You could have sections that have questions that they're dependent on. If you remove the dependent question, that section's going to start showing and not functioning appropriately. So you can see I've got some questions here that have green, so I need to be familiar with what's causing these questions to appear, because if this specific question is probably the one that's controlling these, so I don't want to delete this one. Unless I want to get rid of all of them, then I would delete that one as well as the rest, or exclude that one as well as the rest as well. Something else that you'll want to look for, of course, here, there's a question. This is a date question type. So of course, when you clone an application, some of our clients, if I click on the question here, whenever you use a date field question type, it asks for a minimum date and maximum date. So of course, when you clone an application, any questions? If you've narrowed this date down, you can see we use here, when we build, we use a pretty broad date frame here. But if you have maybe for that specific year, you only want a date between certain, like their date of birth between certain years, maybe you only want them to be a certain age, and you've put a specific date, when you clone that application, you're going to want to go in and adjust that minimum and maximum date to fit the new application's terms. And then of course hit save and exit. Okay. Another thing that you may need to do in your application forms, of course, you can add questions, but you could have a question, and in that question, I was thinking I had it. Let me go back out. I have another application. I thought I had it in this one. Nope. Let me look at this one, just so I have an example to show you what I'm talking about. No. Okay, but you could have a question, and in that question, you are providing a document for the applicant. I don't have one to show you. So in the actual application, let me see if I put it in this one. Okay, here's one. So here we have an application, and if I had cloned this application, and you'll notice in this application, I am providing a document for the applicant. So now I've cloned my application, and I need to switch this document. This document was last year's document. I need to provide a new document to my applicants. So in order to switch that out, what I would have to do is go to this question. At the bottom of the question is where I attached that document. I would need to remove that document. This is only if it's a new document, you need to update it. Save and exit. I always go out, and then I go back in to make sure it clears. Then choose File. Go locate that document that I attached. Not the one I attached, but the new document, of course, you want to attach to that question, the new document. Then, of course, click Open. The new document will be attached, and then hit Save and Exit again. That's how you would switch those documents out. So that's something else. If you have documents, and those are maybe you've cloned last year's application, this year you have a new document, new dates in that document you want to provide to the applicants, then that's how you would do that. Find the question that has the document attached to it. More than likely it's a message question. Find that document. If you're not sure, you can always do preview. I can see, okay, here's that question, there's that document, it's tied to that message question. I can go to the message question and then remove it, click Save and Exit, go back into that same question, choose File, and select the correct document you want to upload. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and stop there and see if there's any questions, because I know everyone has different things in their application forms when they're cloning and rebuilding for the new year, and just give you a minute or two to see if you have any additional questions on maybe items I haven't covered in regards to updating your application form that you might have questions on. So if you have any at this time, please enter those. Okay, so someone has a question, what's the process of making your application live? We're getting there. That'll be the next step that I'm going to be showing you here. Okay, so if you have parent signatures, and in this specific one, I don't think I have one, but you might have a signature section. So like here, I have a student signature, and maybe you have a date question. If you have a question type and it's a date question, then yes, you'll want to click on that question, click on that specific question that has date, click on it, and if you had a date range in there, you're going to want to adjust those if you used a date question type. Of course, if you use the electronic signature, that automatically picks up a date when they enter that signature. However, if you actually added an additional question, date of signature, and you made that question type date, I have seen that in some clients. And on that date, when you click the question type like we did earlier, if you put specific dates in there, then yes, you will need to adjust those dates manually. Okay. Do we have any further questions? Okay, so I'm going to go out here, just back up here to the setup dashboard. And of course, requests and instructions, that's another area where you may have entered dates. So of course, look in here, look in these instructions. Did I type any dates in these instructions? If I did, then of course, I need to adjust those manually as well. Okay, so that's the build of the application. We're talking about this as a one-to-one application. And let me get out of here because that says one-to-many. So now we've got our application form. We've cloned it. We've got the new application. So now the next question we had is, how do we make it live? Well, of course, to make it live, we have to tie it to a funding source. There's no funding source listed here for this application form yet. So on a one-to-one application, so let me go ahead and go home. And here under Setup Scholarships, right here, we go to Setup Scholarships. So locate the funding source, and you can keep the same funding source as you did the prior year. So here's that application I cloned. Here's the application that was tied to it for the last period. I'm going to click on that scholarship name. I can use the same one. And you'll notice here's the application when I first come in. The associated application is the old application. Now, one thing you want to make note of before you change this, you do not want to roll your funding source to the new application. And this is very important, is one, you want to make sure before you roll it, you have done all of your awarding in the prior application. If you have not awarded all your applicants, do not roll that information yet. Also, if you're using the links, there's links, the grant link, and then on some of the newer sites, you have a post-acceptance link for those post-accepted sections. As soon as you roll the application to the new application on this funding source, these links are going to be going to that new application form, not the old one. So you're going to want to make a note of these links. You're going to want to highlight them before you roll it, put them, save them someplace so that you have them. Because as soon as I switch out this application, I'm now going to be on the new year's period. So one, make sure you've done all your awarding. Two, make sure you've picked up the post-accepted links so that you have those. Because as soon as I remove this application, put the new application on, everything's going to roll to the new period. You'll also notice right now this academic year has 14-15. This is picking up that information from that original application. That's why we wanted, when we were in that general information, we wanted to make sure we knew what the date was for that original application. So of course now I have this fund. If I did use dates in my fund name, all I need to do is just type it, the new date, if I wanted to keep dates on mine so that this is what the applicant sees when they're looking at that listing. I want them to see a date. I can go ahead and type that in there. Now notice here also if you have text information, now this doesn't keep history. So of course if you change this, it's a permanent change. So like this now it's my new funding year, so I might want to change this to 18. I might want to change this to 18. But of course I don't have that 14 history anymore. I've lost that history because I'm using the same funding source. And then I'm changing it, updating it to applied now for the new period. And there's another one. So those are the things you're wanting to look for. Okay, so now I have all of that information. And now I'm ready. I've done my awarding. I know I'm good. So now I'm going to take this application, associated application, and I'm now going to find the new one I just created and select it. And you'll notice as soon as I selected that application, it now has the academic year for that new application. If I click this green icon, I can see the history. There's the amount allocated and the amount awarded for that prior period. There's also a report I'll show you that you can access that information in the All Reports icon on the home dashboard. Okay, so here you'll see there's my new cycle. There's my fund. there's my application. This is the funding that's going to be used for that one application. This is the date period. If I want to adjust the monetary amount that I'm going to be awarding out of this one, maybe I'm going to be able to award more this year, I can adjust that. And then of course, here it says published. So when you're ready to go live with your application, you go to the grant. So you make sure the application's tied to, or not the grant, the scholarship, I'm sorry, the funding source. You then on that funding source, if this says yes, that makes it a live application. Now, this information here, published yes. So if I hit save and exit, it's going to say now it's returning. So now it's looking at that new, let me see if I can get that back. I forgot I changed that to 2018, didn't I? Right here. So here's that application. That's funding source. Let me just put a 1 in front of that so it goes to the top. There we go. See. Okay. So the published yes in the funding source is what makes it present. If I log out and I look at my scholarships, this page here, that's what makes it present, that published yes. However, this start date and deadline date are controlled by the application and the application general information. This start date and this deadline date are what make the apply button appear. So there will not be an apply button where the applicant can apply to this until January 1st, 2018 hits. January 1st, 2018, the applicant will then come in here. They'll be able to click on this. They'll be able to see the details, and there'll be an apply button for them to apply. The publish on the funding source makes it available on this page. If I was to remove that publish here, if I change this to no, it would not be on that page. And that's how you would make an application private as well. It's not there. That's all this publish does to make it live. You take your application, link it to the funding source. The funding source being published is what makes it available to the applicants to apply to it from that page. So I hope that answers your question in regards to how do you make an application go live. Link it to the funding source and then publish it. Now, one thing you may want to use caution is if you have a live site and you have applications open at the moment and you're cloning an application, and of course when you clone an application and you've linked it and you publish it, if you have the dates within range, maybe you want to test it. So you've put your dates, your start and end date in range so that you can test it, but you don't want applicants going in and starting that application. You can actually unpublish this to no, and it can be treated like a private application process. And there's a couple of modules, a module, I think it's 6, that talks about how to do a private invite, as well as explain to you how to set that up. So you would leave this unpublished and then use the private application process to invite yourself so that you could test. That way applicants can't start applying to that. Okay. And that's module 6, private invitation. And you can invite yourself to an unpublished application with that. Okay, so I'm going to stop here and see if there's any questions before I get into the one-to-many process, because that's a little bit different with the one-to-many on how you connect it to the funds. The cloning's the same. However, when you connect the funds, you're going to do something a little different. So let me go ahead and exit without save here. Okay, someone has a question. What do you do when you have the new and old awarding year open at the same time? So if you haven't awarded, then you can't link that application to the new fund. You have to do the awarding. Otherwise, you have to create a whole new funding source if you still have the awarding open. There's no way you can award once you've changed the application, because what it does is it now says, okay, for this funding source, this is the application that's being used to award. So if you've moved it and you try to go into the old application and try to do awarding, it won't even show a funding source linked to it. So you have to award before you change the funding source. Otherwise, if you have that, then you're going to have to create a whole new fund for each year. You're going to go to set up scholarships, create a new fund, and then tie that new application to that new fund. And then, of course, it's just going to keep building funds over and over. And then, of course, you would have those funds, separate funds for each year is what you would have to create if you can't close it out. So hopefully that answers your question. Okay, so if we don't have any further questions, let's continue. So I'm going to go back home and talk about the one-to-many. And then after we talk about the one-to-many, we'll talk about the notification, the evaluation tasks, and how to archive. So with a one-to-many, same process. You're going to, of course, here's my one-to-many form. I'm going to clone that application. And then make any necessary adjustments for the new year. I'm just going to do this real quick here. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. Same process, update any dates. I'm going to hit save and exit. This is my one-to-many form. Okay. I'm going to pick up these dates. Again, those dates are important, the academic year. And then I'm going to go ahead and exit now. Now that I have that new form built, here it is. Now, what I want to show you is when you clone on a one-to-many process. So let's go into the old application. I'm in the old one, the one I cloned. What does not clone is the manage application funds and the funds criteria, because it's assuming each year your funds change. They may not be the same, so you need to make adjustments to those. So here on this is the old fund I cloned from. So I have my funds. So I have these three funds, 1, 2, and 3, that need to be linked to this application. So for this application, when an applicant applies to this application, the funding for that application, there's 3 funds that they're applying for, and these are the 3 funds. So in the old application, of course, this has all been set up, but you'll notice, the same with the criteria has all been set up. But you'll notice on the cloned version, on the one-to-many form, it does not have these funds tied to it yet. You'll also notice right now, I do not see those funds in my listing to be able to assign. The reason is I haven't rolled those funds to the new year. So of course I'm going to go home. Once I've cloned my application, I've cleaned it up. Now I'm ready to go start linking the funding sources to it. So I'm going to go to the Setup Funding, and I'm going to locate, first of all, the posting fund. So remember, the posting fund is the fund that makes that application go live, and that's the fund that's linked just for it to be shown on the dashboard for the applicants to start applying to it. So I'm going to select that one first. And that's the one, there's no money tied to it because it's just that posting fund. Those that have the one-to-many process know what I'm talking about when I talk about the posting fund. So then, of course, there's the year. So I'm going to take that posting fund. I'm going to add my new application to the posting fund. That's tied, the application's tied to it. And I'm going to hit save and exit. Everything else is ready. Okay, so now I have my one-to-many tied to that new application fund. Now, these three funds, remember, they're not showing up yet, so how do I get them to show up? So I'm going to go in each of my funds now. They are showing the old awarding period, and of course you're going to want to award them before you even remove the posting fund from the application. It has to be the same process. It has to be awarded, and all that process needs to be completed. So then you come here and click on the green icon and add the new academic year that matches the application that they're using to apply for those. Enter the monetary amount that's going to be available for that period and hit the plus sign to save it. Then I can hit X, go back, and now this fund now has a 2018-19 period associated with it. And then do that with all, you do not tie the, remember, these you do not tie the application directly to, because we're going to do that in the managed funds. So I'm going to do that on all my funds that are part of the process. So I'm going to go to Fund 2, go to that, add an 18-19 so it matches the application. You got to put an amount. Then I can hit the plus sign to save it. It's important to save it. Save and exit, and then go to fund number 3. Do the same, an 18-19 period. Hit plus to save it. It's saved. Close, and save and exit. Now you'll notice if I go, once I've rolled these funds to the new period, and I've linked this to the posting fund, I can then go home. I can go to the Setup Applications. I can go into that new, you'll see here, it shows that scholarship funding source listed here. Click on it. Go to Manage Application Funds, and now you'll see I now have those funds available because they now have that 18-19 date in there. So then, of course, I would select them, holding the Control key down. I'm selecting multiple, hitting my directional arrow, and then clicking Save. And now those funds are assigned. Click OK. And then I can go out, and then I can go and I will have to re-enter the criteria. Now, just so you know, since this, if it stays the same and nothing has changed, the same funds, you can actually, once you're done building your application forms, you've rolled your funds over, you can enter a support ticket, and since these do not clone over, then you can ask support to assist you with setting the criteria on those funds if nothing has changed. If it was the same criteria as last year and you just need the information from the 2017, tell them you want the information from your 2017, give them the name of that application, the funds that you need rolled over, and the funds that you need attached, and then that the eligibility is the same. Then just tell them you need the eligibility and the funds attached for that new application, and they can assist you with that through a support ticket. Okay, so that's how you do a one-to-many when you have multiple funds. It's important to make sure you roll those funds as well as the actual posting fund. Okay, so of course also when you clone, the notification center here, and this is something when you clone, you're going to want to go and do some cleanup work. If any of your email templates, so of course, here's my application forms. There's my 2017. When I cloned my application and I created my new one, it's making an exact replica of that old application form. So of course, any of my email templates, I'm going to need to look at my email templates, and especially the ones that I created, if I have any custom templates that I personally created especially. But you're going to want to go in on your templates, and if you physically typed a date in any of the body of your templates, or you physically typed information like this, if any of that's now changed before you go live, you're going to want to go ahead and adjust that as well. Manually, you have to go in on all your templates and physically type those dates in. That's one thing you're going to want to clean up. Also, when you clone, in the evaluations on the application you cloned, it's going to clone from the original application. it's going to clone your evaluation setup. So any tasks you had on the old application will now be in the new application. So this is the one I cloned. These are the tasks in that application form. So these are the tasks for the reviewers, the review committee tasks, those cloned over. So of course, then I can go in if I want to, I can look at those tasks, create edit, looks at the questions, and then of course I might want to adjust these questions for the new year's information. This is last year's tasks being cloned into the new application. And so if before I turn it over to my reviewers, I might want to adjust it. Also, when you clone, it clones the same committees. So you'll see I have my committees, and so of course these committees may change, and so then of course it's keeping the old members, but all I have to do to make an adjustment is just click on the committee name. I can come here, I can remove committee members that aren't part of the committee, and then I can select new committee members that are, click continue, and then that's my new committee. So just so you know, that clones as well, assuming that sometimes your committees, you have the same members from year to year. It keeps that information for you. Another thing that does not clone are any ad hoc reports. So of course, again, if you haven't made any changes and the ad hoc reports are the same ad hoc reports looking at the same questions in the old application, then you can enter a support ticket and let them know the name of the old application, the name of the ad hoc report you want pulled into, and then into what application do you want that report built, and then they can assist you with that as well. Okay. Okay. So let's see here. Someone's asking a question about 9.0. That's a question I'm not 100% sure on. Of course, I'm still, like I said, I don't have the 9.0 version to test anything. So I will be testing all of that information. So if someone said that a feature was available, then more than likely it is something that will be part of 9.0. I don't know because I don't have that version yet. Okay, someone has a question. How do you handle a fund that will be awarded through different applications? So if you have a fund, so of course you have a fund and you have two applications applying to it, then of course what the system does, if it's more than likely a one-to-many, I'm assuming, so you have one application and that fund is funding two different applications. If you need to separate it out, then you would need to make two separate funds. So if you had 100,000 allocated from this fund for this application and it's one application, then you'd have to create a separate fund for that. And then if you had 50,000 allocated and you needed to keep that separate, then you would need to, of course, make a separate fund for that one. You would have to say application 1 and then the name of the fund, application 2, the name of the fund. You would have to have two funds, one for each application, in order to keep that separate if you wanted to keep the monetary amount separate. Now, otherwise, in a one-to-many process, you can have a posting fund, but then you can have the fund linked to that application because you're using the posting fund, and then you can have another one-to-many application and have it linked to that same fund. But that's kind of a complex setup. And I know who's asking this, so we have a training coming up, so I'll talk to you about that later. But usually if it's two funds and you need to separate the money, you've got to do two separate funds. But it all depends on if it's a one-to-many or a one-to-one, so we'll talk about that later. Okay. Just so you know, if I go home, and here in Batch Awards, All Scholarships, this will actually give you the history of your funding. So if you have an application and you use 2 cycles to fund, or you have a fund and you're using 2 cycles to fund it, of course you're switching out, you're doing one application for one cycle, then you remove that application and you attach it, and it's all within the same cycle. You can actually come here And under the award applicants report, you can select a scholarship. Of course, I don't have a, and then it'll show you the name of the application. And of course, if you're looking at an academic year, let's say if I say 2018-19 and I had 2 applications in this 2018-19 period, so I had cycle 1 and cycle 2, then of course I can come here, select the fiscal period, academic period, and then it would give me, of course that one doesn't have any data in it, but it will give me the name of the application, who applied to it, and then if there was 2 applications in that same period, it would give me the other application as well, listed in this listing. And then it would give me the awarding information, but it's a total for that period. So of course, the person that has the question about separating it out, that's where that's going to cause some issues if you don't have 2 separate funds for the 2 different application processes. If they're running concurrently, I should say. If they're consecutive, then yes, we can switch them out. But if they're concurrent, that's what I'm saying, we have to have that separate meeting because it all depends on how they're running. I don't want to confuse everybody else on the call. I apologize. Okay. So the last thing I want to show you, of course, is in the setup of applications, you'll notice there's an archive button. And archiving, what it does is, so you can see I have several applications here. Maybe several of them are no longer active. I'm completely done with that process. What I can do is I can actually archive these. Archiving an application does not make it to where I can no longer use it. When I archive an application, it also archives it for the applicant. So you'll notice whenever I'm looking at application listings like we see here, so I'm looking here, I'm in applications, I'm looking at this listing of applications, I have a toggle called active and archive. Anything that's archived, if I click that, these are my archived applications. I can still click on those applications. I can still access them if I need to. They're not gone completely. Same as here in evaluations. If I want to see applicants that applied, if I go to my archive listing, this will give me my archived applications. Once I archive it, they have the same. Active are the only ones that are active. If it's an old application I've archived, they call me and say, hey, I can't find this application. I know I've archived it. I can tell them choose the archive toggle and they'll find that application form. So how do you archive an application? So if I go home to set up application forms, and I want to archive, all I need to do is put a selection. I can do one, I can do multiple, and make sure I'm in the active. You'll see there's an archive button. I click archive after I select them, and they're removed from my active status. They're no longer here. However, I can go to archive, and you'll see that those that are archived, they're now here in the archive. It's just a cleanup to get them off of your main active list. If an application is archived, I can actually do the opposite. I'm in the archive. I can reactivate them by coming here, selecting them, and then clicking the active button. And now you can see I need to go back to active, and now they're here on the active screen. So that's pretty much all I had to show you today. So let me see if you have any additional questions. And then if you don't have any questions, looks like everyone's pretty good. So someone has a question about ScholarSnap. ScholarSnap is looking at that XML language. So of course, do not change the XML and that won't have an impact on your ScholarSnap. If you add questions, then of course you would need to have some assistance by entering a support ticket. Of course, because if you add questions, you would need those linked to the ScholarSnap platform. And so if you add a question, then you would need to contact support to have that added to ScholarSnap. But the XML is very important. That's where you definitely do not want to change XML because that's how it's connecting to that ScholarSnap platform. Okay, so I don't see any further questions. So of course, that's the end of our session for today. There is a handout, Module 14, Application Rollover. So if any of you want some questions on the application rollover, there is a handout attached. So go to your handout section in that little dialog box that you have where the questions were. Usually it's right under the questions. There's a section that says handouts. Click the arrow or the plus sign to open it, and you should see this. I'll leave this open for a little while. Click on the blue name, and that'll download it. And then once you download it, be sure and save it to your local computer, and you'll have a copy of it. If you have questions, you can always, again, there's our support portal. And then also all of you, to access the support portal, you also have on your screen here, if I go to the bottom here, this help here also takes you to that support portal where you can look at many of the guides that we have available. Application invitation, that's the invitation process. So if you want to not publish your funding source yet and you want to test it and you don't want applicants going in and applying, then you can use this application process. That's the instructions on how to do that. And then also videos. So all of our webinars that we've held. So if you go to videos, webinar, today's webinar will be added there probably by the end of this week. You should see it there. You'll come here. This is the playlist of our past webinars. You can research, you can click on, you can view. And then of course, the newest one is usually the one that's on top. So more than likely when they update this screen, then today's webinar will be present as well. Okay. Okay, so I'll leave that open for a little while. And then again, I want to thank you for your time and hope you all have a wonderful day. And then our next training will be October 17th. More than likely, we'll be going over the global administration task. That's usually a 3-part series. So be on the lookout for information on that, October 17th. And more than likely, we'll be using the 9.0 platform in that new training. And I thank you very much. Now, you have a good day.